In all likelihood, the Palestinians are going to unilaterally declare statehood in Judea and Samaria within the coming year. This is not a ploy or a desperate attempt on their part, but rather a clear, rational decision. By correctly gauging the stark contrast between the massive international support for their cause as opposed to the steadily increasing de-legitimization of Israel, the apartheid state, the Palestinians have wisely decided to bypass direct negotiations, since there is no point in paying for something when you can get it for free. Thus, with country after country pledging its support, the Palestinians are going to take their case to the United Nations. There, the Palestinians have nothing to lose, for even if the Security Council rejects their bid for statehood, it will most likely be approved by the General Assembly, although this is less significant than endorsement by the Security Council, and approval by the General Assembly does nonetheless have some teeth. Most notably, as many commentators pointed out, there is something known as UNGA Resolution 377 that allows the General Assembly to call for sanctions or even military force against a country that fails to implement its recommendations. Frankly, I would be shocked if it even went to past the UN Security Council. I think the U.S. will finally see the handwriting on the wall, and they will be forced into voting with the other Security Council members, and will allow for the recognition at that point. If the civilized world helps bring the Palestinian plan to fruition, then a very likely result of such actions will be the outbreak of war. Thus, in a world turned upside down, it will be the UN, a body formed to help foster peace throughout the world, which will be directly responsible for bringing the next great Arab-Israeli war to the Middle East. The war will not break out immediately, but rather it will slowly escalate. First, there will be calls for sanctions against Israel for failing to immediately remove its military and citizens from the new Arab state in Judea and Samaria. Then there will be the predictable eruption of terrorist attacks in Judea and Samaria, making life hell for the Jews living there. The attacks will then spill over into the rest of Israel, bringing back memories of the horror of a decade ago. Next up will be rocket attacks from Hamas in the south and Hezbollah in the north. Thanks to a porous border with Egypt as well as other regional changes, Iran will have no problem constantly rearming its proxies. Just a comment from me, I do not believe Hezbollah or Hamas will act too aggressively in their missile strikes at first. This would bring on war, and I believe Israel would hold Syria responsible for any Hezbollah major missile attack. That will indeed come later. However, as the attacks intensify, Israel will be routinely chastised for retaliating and not showing proper restraint, as such Arab attacks will be viewed as somewhat understandable in light of continued Israeli non-compliance. Moreover, Israeli reprisals will probably draw some neighboring countries into the fray, as they will begin to sense Israel's imminent downfall. This may be how the Psalm 83 war materializes, with the blessing of the international community. If this is not the beginning of this war, and if Israel is still obstinate following the sanctions and Arab attacks, then the UN may call for military intervention in order to enforce the will of the international community. Consequently, they will do to Israel what they will never do to Iran. After all, Israel's continued presence in Judea and Samaria, and not Arab violence, terrorism, hatred, and anti-Semitism, will be considered, like it is today, as being the main reason that peace and harmony is lacking in the region. Following the isolating effect of sanctions and de-legitimization, together with incessant terrorist attacks and missile showers, the threat of military intervention will probably do the trick. Having been cowed by the cumulative effect of all the actions, Israel will be sufficiently pliable to give in on everything: the removal of all Jewish presence from Judea and Samaria, the acceptance of the return of Palestinian refugees to Israel, the division and internalization of Jerusalem. Thus, the Palestinian War of Independence, the first stage in the total elimination of the State of Israel, will come to a conclusion. This scenario is very likely to start unwinding in the very near future, and maybe even sooner than we think. I was talking to a friend of mine at church the other day, and he brought up a point that seems to have slipped through the cracks of the Middle East news. In a few short weeks, a flotilla of 15 ships from all over the world will enter Israeli-controlled waters in a second attempt to break the Gaza blockade. At the same time, organizers say more than 1 million people will participate in a global sit-in at Israeli embassies worldwide. This is in support of the 9 million Palestinian refugees worldwide who they believe have legitimate right of return to their homeland occupied by Israel. Palestinian communities in Europe and Latin America were being targeted for the rally and being asked to gather outside Israeli diplomatic offices in world capitals. Both of these events will begin on May 15th. The flotilla, the refugee protest, and the UN recognition of a Palestinian state is all a coordinated attempt to completely delegitimize the State of Israel. Eventually, it will all end in a regional war. Will this prompt the start of the Psalm 83 war, the war of Gog and Magog, or both? Wherever this war leads, it seems that Satan is well on his way in his attempt to completely destroy God's people, Israel. This is Terry Malone with the Calvary Prophecy Report.